Where were you, Tito?
Actually, I was at home doing some work, and one of my sons had called me and asked me, was it true what we're hearing about Uncle Michael? So I said, what is it that you're hearing? He said that they just rushed him to the hospital. So I immediately tried to tune into CNN Headlight News, and had learned that on my way, I called my mom, and she said, you guys better get down here. So on the way there, Janet had called me and said, Tito, are you driving? I said, yes, I am. She said, pull over. And when she said that, I knew something was drastically wrong. And I pulled over, and she broke the bad news to me. I was at home, and my middle son, Terrell, had given me a call and said, is it true what they're saying about Uncle Michael? I said, what are they saying? I wasn't watching the news. He said he's being rushed off to the hospital, and he's not breathing and all these things. And I said, I don't know, I have to check into it. So I immediately called my mother, and called my cousin Trent, who's with my mother 24/7. And he said, yes, we're on our way to the hospital. I said, can you tell me anything? He said, no, but your mother said you should prepare yourself to come over. So I was in Calabasas, my home, and on my way there I had stopped by the gas station, and I decided to call my sister Janet to see if she had heard anything further. And she asked me, was I driving? And I said, yeah. She's asked me if I was on the freeway. I said, no, but I'm about to get on the freeway. She said, don't. She said, pull over. And right when she said that, I knew he was gone. I just knew something was wrong. And she said, Tito, he passed away. And I just sat in my car, and I just was messed up for quite a while. So I went to my mom's house and waited for the family to come home, and stayed there about a half an hour, and they showed up. And my mom was pretty sad, and so was Jermaine and Latoya and everyone, and it was just the hardest time of my life.
When someone said Michael Jackson went into cardiac arrest, I knew exactly where I was at.
I was basically at home working, and I had gotten a call from my son who had seen it on television, and I couldn't believe it, and tried to find it myself, and I couldn't, so I called my mom immediately, and she was already on her way to UCLA. And she said she would call me to see what's going on, if it's true or something's going on. And I called back. She said, you better come down here. And that's how I got it.
Our brother, our hero, the world is mourning, we're mourning, the fans are mourning. It's unreal, it's unbelievable.
He first heard his brother was being rushed to the hospital from a friend. After some confusion, he then called his mother, who told him the tragic news.
She was crying, saying he was dead. And Matt, to hear my mother say, Michael's dead, to feel and hear the tone in her voice, to say her child is dead, is nothing that anyone can ever imagine.
How'd you find out your brother died?
I was on the other side of town in Azusa, and I got a call from you guys on my wife's phone.
CNN?
Yes. And they said, did you know that your brother was rushed to the hospital? And I said, what? So I called my mother immediately, and I got her on the phone, and she said she was on her way. And so a little time went by, and I spoke to Janet, and I spoke to a few other siblings, and then about 45 minutes later, and then I called my mother back, and I heard her sound in her voice saying that he's dead. And just a feeling of emptiness came before my body, because to hear my mother say her child is dead and my brother's dead is, I've never ever thought that I would ever hear this from her lips. Well, I was on the other side of Pasadena. My first phone call was you guys. And
You found out from CNN?
I found out from CNN. And I just said, I'm going to call my mother right away. So I called my mother. She said she was on her way to the hospital. Within 45 minutes passed, I spoke to Janet, and I spoke to our attorney, Joe Katz, and the next thing I knew, I called my mother back, and she could hear her voice. She was at the hospital. She said, he's dead. And it was just a horrible tone in her voice.
Were you able to see Michael after his death?
Yes, I did. I raced across town. I first got the word from you guys that there was something going on with him going to the hospital. So I called my mother immediately, and then she said yes, she was on her way. I was in Azusa on the other side of Pasadena, and then 45 minutes went by, and I spoke to my sister Janet, spoke to Joel Katz, our attorney. The next thing I knew, I called my mother back, and I heard this tone of her voice saying, he's dead, and she was crying. And I just cried and drove across town very quickly. And then
you got to see him?
Yes. I came to UCLA and saw all helicopters flying in the sky and everything. And first when I walked into the hospital, I went straight to my mother, caressed her, and then I went to the room and saw him just lifeless. And it just tore my heart out.
And Jermaine?
I was in Azusa on the other side of Pasadena, and Larry King had called my wife and said, did you know anything about your brother being rushed to the hospital? So I immediately called my mother.
That's the way you found out, was a phone call from Larry King?
Yes. And my mother called, I called my mother, and she told me she's on her way to the hospital. 45 minutes had gone by. I had spoken to Janet, and I had spoken to an attorney, Joel Katz, and when I called my mother back, she said, he's dead. And the tone of her voice, from that point on, I just dropped the phone and cried, and we rushed, my wife and I, we rushed across town, and as we got closer to UCLA, in Westwood, we saw all the helicopters in the sky, and it was taped off and everything, and I immediately went to console my mother. She was just sitting there in a daze, and then I went to see my brother laying there lifeless, and it just tore me apart. It just broke down.
Where were you when he died?
I actually was in Georgia when he had passed.
They phoned you?
Actually, no. Actually, I got a phone call from a friend of mine who said, is your brother all right? I said, what are you talking about? He was rushed to the hospital. As I was calling my brothers, calling my mom, my daughter downstairs said, Dad, Uncle Michael's dead.
I was at my house in New York. You know, another day, another morning, and I get a call.
It was her assistant who told her that Michael had collapsed.
And so, your brother's been taken to the hospital. It's on CNN right now.
Breaking news.
Apparently, Michael Jackson suffered cardiac arrest this afternoon. He was
I
rushed
called
to
everyone.
UCLA.
I spoke spoke to Mother. I spoke to Tito. I spoke to my sister, Latoya. They were headed to the hospital.
And you headed to the airport?
Not at that very moment. I didn't know the severity of it. No one knew. I tried calling again, and that's how I found out that he was no longer. I don't know.
Let me ask you a couple of questions, and you can answer as much as you're able to.
Sure.
The report that there was a chunk of money missing right after his death. Where is that?
I don't know if there was money missing after his death. I have no idea. This is what was said. Whether it was or not, who knows? I don't know. But I do know that Michael passed somewhere around 9:30. But I do know that Michael passed somewhere around 9:30. And people were in and out of his home. The family didn't get to Michael's house until nearly 12:30 that night.
You were in the hospital?
Yes, I was. Yeah.
And did you get there in time to get any sense of Michael at all? Or
No, actually Michael had passed at his home. He did not pass in the hospital. He was dead at home. And you must remember the doctor called 2 hours later. I think it was 2 to 3 hours later. The doctor called 2 hours later. I think it was 2 to 3 hours later. And he was dead before they got there.
Yeah.
He had
How did you find out?
I found out through my father. My father called me and told me to get over there right away. He says, Michael's going, they're taking him to the hospital. He's sick. And I said, he is? He goes, yes. And he called me like 10 minutes later and says, Latoya, you get over there immediately. I think he's had a heart attack or something like that. He says, I don't know what it is. And that's when I got in the car and I started driving over there. And I called my mother's assistant because my mother was there. And I kept asking him, how's he doing? How's he doing? And he would never, ever tell me. I kept saying, Trent, how's he doing? Can you tell me how he's doing? And he wouldn't say anything. I heard my mother in the background. She yelled, who is it? And he says, it's Latoya. And she goes, he's dead! And she just screamed it so loud. And when she did that, I was driving and I almost crashed the car, and I stopped the car and I asked people, please can you drive me, because everything gets weak. All of my legs and everything got so weak.
I see you shaking.
Yeah, I know it's bringing that feeling back. I was just crying, saying, please drive me, please. And I was only like 3 minutes away because I'm about 5 or 3 minutes from Michael. Yeah.
And there were stories that the doctor even called your father before he called 911. Is that true? There were so many stories that came out.
No, he didn't call my dad. I don't know if he did. I never asked my father that, actually. I don't know.
Did you know Marie? No, I never met him. I didn't even know he existed.
Ever talked to him on the phone?
No. I only knew that he existed from Michael telling me that he had met him in Las Vegas.
Met him through
his
Joe
father.
Jackson.
Yeah, we both know that.
And
through his father.
And am I correct that this was probably in October of 2008?
Somewhere around then, yes. We know that Murray knew Joe Jackson, right?
Joe Jackson introduced Dr. Murray to Michael Jackson.
You think that Joe Jackson never talked to Murray once he came to Los Angeles?